create. Nice move. He will shoot, and he will score!
Welcome to Our Schools, Our City. This is our March edition, and I'm going to cross my fingers and say I think we're through with the winter and we're into the spring. That is my hope. Today certainly feels that way. So, but you know, with the spring comes so many wonderful activities and celebrations, you know, here in Somerville Public Schools. And you know, one of the things today that we really want to showcase, as I'm sure many folks from our audience, as you go around and you look at our schools, is that you see there's lots of different models and ways of doing instruction throughout our K-8s particularly. And so today we're featuring the Healy community. And one of the wonderful things about the Healy is that project-based learning has been such a key component to the way that school is done, especially over the last few years. And so we have some very special guests with us today, students and teachers.
Absolutely. There's a lot of really great work happening across the district, and it's really nice to have a team of Healy experts that are going to share a little bit about their experience at the school with us today. First, we have Steve Stefano, who is a 7th grade math teacher at the Healy School. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve.
My pleasure.
Sitting next to him is Cindy Luxama, and she is a 7th grade student at the Healy. Thanks for joining us, Cindy.
You're welcome.
And then we also have Nicole Madden, who is a grade 7 and 8 social studies teacher at the Healy School. Thank you for joining us. And next to her is Andrew DaCosta, an 8th grade student at the Healy.
Yes.
We look forward to hearing from you all.
So it might be nice just to share with our audience a little bit about each of you. You know, if you're a teacher, you know, how you got into teaching, how long have you been at the Healy? And for our students, you know, what do you love about the Healy? What do you love? What are you interested in? What do you do in your free time? Just to be able to give the audience a sense of who you are. So who would like to start with that?
My name's Steve
The shy
Stefano, the shy one, the quiet one. And I've been at the Healy School for 18 years. And I used to teach 5th and 6th grade. It was a mixed 5th and 6th grade class. And then 7 years ago, I got finally promoted and made it into 7th grade and have been teaching 7th and 8th grade math for the last 7 years.
Wonderful.
And we were talking before the show, and Steve was actually on the show a few years back, right? 15
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, I think at that time it was with Bob Snow.
Oh, yes.
He ran it. I don't think Argenziano was ever like hosting the show, so it was Bob Snow, I think, who ran it. That's my
Excellent.
Welcome
recollection. Yeah, I remembered
A
where it
return
was.
guest.
That's right.
That's cute. It's great. Nicole?
So I've been at the Healy School for 4 years, my 4th year right now, and I've been in education for 7 years. I got into teaching through an AmeriCorps Year of Service in Boston.
Great.
I was placed in a middle school, and I loved it, and wanted to continue working in the field.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Thanks. Andrew?
I've been in the school since kindergarten. Now I'm in 8th grade. It's my last year at the Healy. And I'm excited to go to high school. I have an older sibling there.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, and I can't wait.
Excellent.
Has it gone by fast?
It has, yeah. Barely remember.
What, do you do any activities outside of school?
Yeah, I like to play soccer.
Excellent. So maybe we gain a great soccer player at the high school.
Yes.
I'm sure that they'll
I
appreciate
hear
that.
he's pretty good.
That's what I hear too. That's good. That's good. We like that. Cindy?
I've been at the school since 1st grade, and I really like 7th grade because there's a lot of projects that we get to do that I didn't get to do like in the years before that. And I just like the schedule and the structure of the school itself because it kind of helped me get like more responsibility.
That's great. So that's like a perfect segue. So you mentioned project, and a lot of people in education call it PBL or project-based learning. So for our audience, what is project-based learning from the teacher side, and then as students, how do you get to experience it? What's different about that kind of learning when you get to work on projects?
So I think we're a good combination because I think that we both love project-based learning, but we sort of see it a little bit differently. I'm not driven by standards, which I know, of course, is not the most, not the best thing to say on TV, but I view teaching out of a textbook as sort of like fishing, like with a fishing rod, and you're aiming to try and catch one fish and use like a particular lure, and you're going to be going for that fish. And I view project-based learning more like using a net, and yeah, you're probably going to catch the thing you're looking for, but you're also going to catch some other stuff along the way, and you're not sure what it's going to be. And to me, that's the really exciting part. And so like this year we did a unit, which I'm sure that Cindy will talk about, on designing and building scale model houses. And so as it was going on, not only did I learn a whole bunch, but the kids were learning things, and it was much beyond, sort of what they would expect to learn on the day-to-day level. So I like to think of project-based learning not as like the little project that you have at the end of a unit, but more the unit itself. And it should create surprises for the kids. People should get really frustrated, but when they really succeed, there's nothing like it, and it's really great.
That's great. It's interesting you said frustrated, and I actually remember seeing some of the demos of the houses when they were being built out, and one of the things that was causing some frustration was the fact that not all houses are completely straight, and that you might have curves, or you might have circular pieces. And how do you, from a student perspective, how do you calculate that? How do you shape that? Why is it important and why is it okay for students to feel frustrated when they're working?
I don't think we learn anything if we don't get frustrated, and I feel like sometimes the thing that we learn is what we're trying to do actually doesn't work, and that also counts as well. And then I also sort of feel like sometimes we stumble on new ways to figure things out, and I think that for students, no matter what you end up doing, you're going to get to a place where you're frustrated and challenged, and I think it's important for people to feel that all the way through education and while you're teaching. There are definitely times when I feel frustrated and challenged, but usually it forces me to think about a different way to teach or work with the kids. And when you come out on the other side, you're like, yes, it worked. And so I think that feeling is really important for kids to see, not the, I can't do this, and then I'm just going to check out. And it's sort of like fools kids sometimes, which is nice, which is like, well, wait a second, I can't, what do you mean I can't miss school today? It's like we have this really great project we're working on. And so they don't really perceive it as sort of the drudgery that is associated with education. And that's also like really great to see. And these guys will talk a little bit about how much work they put into their projects.
I love the analogy that you used about it being a net where you capture a lot of different things that you weren't necessarily expecting to capture. To me, that says that it's very much an interdisciplinary approach to learning. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes. I mean, don't get me wrong. We have a pretty good idea of what they're going to learn, and we have goals that we have set in terms of what we want them to come out with. But you have to be able to just say, okay, well, this is the direction that this student is going, and it may not be the one that I had in mind, but I know they're getting a bunch of great stuff out of this. And whether it's mathematical, or whether it's learning how to work with another person, or whether it's writing, or the idea of learning how to get over frustration, all of that, has benefits.
That's great. Thank you.
Go.
So I think one of the things I like about project-based learning, as opposed to projects or a traditional classroom environment, is that it's inquiry-driven. It's driven around either trying to solve an interesting problem or answer an interesting question. So there's all these different routes students can take and self-direct their own path to answering the question or figuring out the answer. That's much more engaging for them. It makes them feel like they have ownership over the process. Like Steve said, we see our students coming in, spending long hours after school, coming to us, say, when can I work on this?
That's great. Yeah.
And pushing through challenges in a way that they might not in other situations, because we teach the idea that you're going to expect challenges, you're going to expect roadblocks, and part of the project is how do you adapt to that? How do you evolve? How do you try different things out? I'll touch on the idea of bringing in multiple disciplines. I'm a social studies teacher, but one of my biggest project-based learning units is called the Sustainability Fair, and it pulls a lot of science and environmental science into the process too. Students are exercising a lot of different skill sets. They're creating presentations, they're researching, they're doing persuasive writing, but then they're also doing hands-on experiments. So it's a nice opportunity to remind students that in the real world, disciplines are not all separated out. Right. When you have a professional job, you're not just doing one small thing. You might be doing a little bit of math and a little bit of writing and a little bit of science. It all comes into play. And finally, I really like that project-based learning models real-world work. when our students get
Absolutely.
into the
Yeah,
workplace,
sounds like it.
they are going to be doing self-directed projects, setting their own goals, assessing themselves, collaborating with their teammates to try to solve a problem. So it feels much more real-world applicable when they're working on this kind of project.
Do you have an opportunity to bring in outside partners as well to work on some of these projects with the students?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working with the Sprouts team, and they've been coming in. Last year, they had a very present role during all of our projects. We had at least one of them, if not two of them, in our classroom helping us, which was wonderful because we could break students into different groups, have students moving different parts of the building. And this year, they've been consulting with us as we kind of learn to design our own projects. So it's a growing process for us as we get better and more comfortable with what a good PBL should look like. And now they just kind of serve as the supports we need when we need them.
Great.
Right. So that's a big buildup. So for the students, what do you think? What's so different about learning by projects?
Well, I think project-based learning is really good because it gets you excited, to actually like do the project. When you go to school, normally, you get worksheets and short work, and you want to get them done, turn them in for your grade. But the thing about project-based learning is you actually you want to get up in the morning, get to school, and normally most people ended up staying after school working extra time on their project.
That's great.
And you don't learn just what you set out to learn. As mentioned before, there's so many little parts that you learn you wouldn't expect to learn. In my first year of STEAM with Mr. Stefano, I learned so much. I learned a bunch about coding, and that had nothing to do with my project. It was amazing.
That's great. I mean, it's great insight. It's that applied learning too. You'll see as you, particularly when you get into high school, you're going to be using the skills that you learned through the project base, either intentionally or not, in everything you do. And so it has that kind of almost like CTE vocational experience to it. That makes a project base really rich. What was from last year, what was sort of your favorite project?
It was the first one, the first STEAM project. It was about making moving things. Mine didn't even move. It was to create the illusion of something moving.
Oh, that's great.
With LEDs. So I made an infinity mirror. So it's it's only one strip of LED, but once you look inside, it looks like there's hundreds. It looks like it's an endless hole. And that was the best result I've ever
fabulous.
got. It was,
That's great.
yeah.
Did you have an opportunity to kind of show off your final product to a group
yeah.
of peers? And
Yeah, at the end we had a display. Everyone got to see each other's, and it was
that's
a good time.
wonderful.
That's awesome. Cindy?
Well, I like project-based learning because it's more hands-on and it's not like just sitting in class and just doing work, as Andrew said. And I also like it because it helps me get closer to my classmates when I'm working with them. Because usually it's everyone's in their own separate groups and no one's talking to each other. But when you're doing project-based learning with each other, it's everyone's more closer and you get to know more about people.
Now, you're working on a project right now that sounded really interesting.
Yeah, in science class, we're doing moon videos. So me and my partner, we're doing moon phases right now. And we're using paper to make a stop motion of moon phases.
How fun. That sounds great.
That's great, yeah, I know. I remember both the sustainability fair, but also the presentation at the end of the year. And one of the things was that you, as students, you had to articulate and explain to somebody that didn't know your project how you went about it, what you were trying to prove, what you did, and it was pretty amazing, very lofty goals that you set, in each of these projects. For the teachers, I'm sort of curious, but what's the biggest change for you as a teacher from switching from a more traditional method of teaching to project-based?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Want to take it first?
Sure. I think there's kind of two pieces. One, over the course of my teaching career so far, I've been moving more and more towards just very skills-based teaching and less towards content-based, even in social studies class. And project-based learning fits in really well with that and kind of reinforces that value. The other piece that's been a personal challenge that I've been working to overcome is just being flexible and not knowing what tomorrow is going to look like. Because I love planning and organizing and planning ahead, and I make 3 months of lesson plans in advance. I'm that kind of teacher. And project-based learning completely disrupts that for me. And I've had to get comfortable with the idea that anything could happen. And every day I have to sit down and kind of evaluate, okay, what happened on all these different projects? What new questions have come up for different students? What kind of resources do I need to go out and discover and give to them to help them succeed? And it's been really fun doing that. I think it's taught me a lot about how to kind of think on the fly and adapt too. Myself and one of the Sprouts folks, Molly, would sit down and kind of do a resource collection moment after each class last year, and pull different materials together based on, like Andrew said before, you don't know what you're going to end up learning, and like Steve said as well, you have no idea the questions that are going to arise, and then you have to help students figure out how to answer them. Often they're questions I don't know the answer either, so we're all learning together. Yeah.
It's great. Good insight.
So I started teaching 18 years ago, and I've always liked teaching this way, but it was sort of like, there's Mrs. Stefano doing like some wacky thing and going on in the room. But as the years have gone on, I see that it's happening more and more in a lot of places, and people are seeing the value of it. I do see it as a response in many ways to sort of the pressure of testing. I think one of the things that I think kids like and teachers like is, I believe that we need to teach kids some basic facts, and they need to learn algebra, and they need to learn geometry, and they need to learn it some old school way and some new school way. But part of, I think, being in school is making it entertaining, and not entertaining, but interesting and fun for everybody involved. And so I feel like as the years, I feel like over the last 10 years, more and more projects like this have taken place. And I think that people are understanding that you can absolutely have kids learn a ton. And it may not be exactly what you want, but you see it and you know exactly what they are learning. I also think that people perceive it, or used to perceive it, almost like play when they would look in, or chaos in a room. And I sort of think of it as like, you can't do it unless you're good at what you do. In other words, a musician can't improvise unless they are really good musicians. And I sort of feel that that's the same way with teaching. It's sort of like there are times when you have to teach what you need to teach, but there are times when improvisation goes a long way. And it keeps it interesting for me, which I think is important, and it keeps it interesting for the kids.
So as I'm listening to the conversation, what's interesting to me is it seems like through this project-based learning, the adults are modeling what the students are doing through their projects by being flexible and adapting to the conditions at the time for that particular day. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the design piece. You mentioned that you're learning how to design and you're getting some support from Sprouts. What role do students play in designing projects as well? And can you talk a little bit about what it takes to, from A to Z to design a project-based approach or project?
Sure. So we usually start at the end, the kind of backwards design model. Start with what kind of product or big understanding you want kids to walk away with, and then work backwards. Okay, what kind of projects could get them there? What kind of questions could get them there? And when it comes to students participating in that process, they have a lot of choice in the route they're going to take to answer the question. So one big project to do is the sustainability fair that I've mentioned, and we've had students doing essentially science projects. We've had students doing public service announcements. We've had this really wide range where in a classroom and for the same project you have kids creating like a social media campaign, and then you have kids like Andrew boiling milk and vinegar on a Bunsen burner or whatever. So kids can choose where their strengths or interests are and find a route that fits for them within like some limits and structures that we've provided. I don't know if you want to add on.
Yeah, so the project I did last year was much different than how I started this year. And so last year the goal was for students to make something that moves. And people were like, well, what does that mean? It's like, that's it, okay? You have to take it from there. It's not that easy to make things move. And if you're going to make things move, you got to think about math, but you got to think about other things as well. And that's what Andrew was talking about. This year, at the beginning of the year, I thought about having the kids design and build scale models of homes, which is something that I'd always wanted to do. I thought about being an architect when I was younger, so I knew it would be fun. And so that had some more parameters to it. This was like, This is as much space as you get. This is how many rooms have to be in there. And maybe Cindy can talk a little bit about it, but there was minimal requirements, so the houses didn't end up looking the same. So in both cases, I feel like that the students had complete control over what they were doing. There are a few more limitations in terms of building a house, which is in fact real.
Absolutely.
There are much, and so they had to understand that. But there was no like, oh, no, you can't do this, or your house can't look like this. All it really was, sorry, you know what, you just took up too much space. There's just not that much space, on the plot of land you're using, kind of thing. And that was the case, with the moving project last year, which was, Andrew made a mirror that made it look like you were moving. Someone else designed an amusement park. There was a wide variety of things. And for me, the question was, so how are you going to get from here to the place that you want to go? And what are you going to do to get there? And so if the students do exactly what you tell them to do, then they don't own it.
Right.
And you lose
exactly.
them.
And they end up setting their own, they find their own limits. They'll throw out a lot of different ideas on different ends of the spectrum and kind of talk themselves down from them or realize what's reasonable or realistic. And we don't actually have to do a lot of constraining, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They kind of figure out for themselves what they can do and what's an appropriate scope. And
So I want to go back to something Cindy said when you identified that part of the fun of project-based learning is getting to know your classmates, working together. How do you each kind of go about when you're working on a project and you're working with different groups of kids? How do you go about organizing yourselves? And what are some of like the challenges to it in working in a group?
Well, at first, when I started the sustainability fair, I was working with 2 other people, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to be able to like work with them. And I kind of already talked to them, but I wasn't like their best friends. And then we started just talking about the ideas we wanted, and we resolved on one, and we started just working, and it kind of felt fun because I got to know them better, and like now I talk to them much more.
That's great. And did you so you have a very long list of things you have to do about the project for the outcome. How do you go about figuring out who does what?
Well, we just kind of like decided who wants to do it, and then the leftovers, we just kind of just like gave it to people, and everyone was fine with that.
So you had to have some leadership, right? You had to have some leadership in there too. That's good. Andrew, what about you?
Well, about working with classmates, you really get to, you get to know them, even though they're not exactly like you, you get a good time. And, even though, like, it's very frustrating at the beginning, it usually turns out right. It was my first year with Mrs. Stefano on the STEAM project. We got assigned groups, and I didn't really get my ideal group. And so we did a lot of brainstorming in the beginning about what we wanted to do. And our group just decided that we didn't want to work together, so we each split into
Self-mutiny.
Yeah, it was a unanimous decision. Everyone thought no one wants to work with each other, and everyone's project turned out fine.
That's great. So you did individual projects then?
Yeah.
But all worked on the same project?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
It is.
I think there's so much learning that goes on when you have to work with other people, and I think as students, I think that's one of the really tangible things you learn as you get older and you can apply in a job. What we hear about 21st century is future employers and colleges want to know that you can work cooperatively with other people. They want to know that you can solve a problem like 4 people see things very differently. So we have to figure out how to coexist and still get the project done.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like one of the outcomes of something like project-based learning you might not get in the same way in a traditional classroom.
So one of the things that Andrew brought up that's interesting is just this idea that like we would spend a lot of time after school talking about what had happened that day. And so that's a really good example. So we had to sort of think to ourselves, okay, wow, we have them all working in groups, but here's this group, and it feels like they're all going to do this really cool things, but it means that they're not going to actually be working in groups, which is one of the things that we wanted to have them do. And so, it's this process where you have to sort of examine each day where you're going. So that sort of caught us off guard, and it did turn out great. And it wasn't like, oh, I hate working with so-and-so. It was more like, I want to do this really cool thing, and this other person wants to do this really cool thing, and they finally were just like, hey, they came to us and said, we want to work alone. So we had to talk about that. So sometimes we have to give up, what we want for them to get what they want.
For the students, what in working on a project, what has it taught you about yourself you didn't know? What kind of did you discover by working in project-based learning that you didn't kind of know about yourself as a learner?
Well, you get to know your limitations. So, for last year also, I think we were doing a project in English class, and we were making a movie of any sort. There wasn't really much regulations. In our movie, we got to pick our groups. I worked with my ideal group, and the movie turned out great. It was a really good movie. The class loved it. It was funny. And then we did another movie later on the year. And so we got together in the same group, and it didn't turn out like the previous one. So you get to discover that, it's not very predictable, what your project's going to end up. You don't always get what you started for.
That's great. That flexibility, that's great. Cindy?
I didn't expect for me to be able to work with the people that I worked with the sustainability fair, because years ago I usually was doing a lot of the work, and then this year I found out I can actually split up the work, and it was a lot of fun to just work with other people and be able to not have to do a lot.
That's great.
Cindy, do you have a favorite project that you've worked on?
Well, I have to say my favorite project was the sustainability fair, because I just liked working with my partners, and I just liked being able to present my project afterwards.
Okay.
That's great. For the teachers, so parents are watching, and we're talking a lot about project-based learning in Somerville Public Schools and different applications of it. A lot of people connect it with STEM, but it's much bigger than STEM or STEAM. And so what would you say to parents about why this is such an amazing way for our students to learn and have the opportunity to, and in particular the Healy?
I feel like when I talk with parents and they come in and they're like, I'm a little worried that my kid isn't getting this exact thing here. I pretty much have two questions for them. And I ask them, I said, do you feel like your child is learning? And they're like, yes. And do you feel like they're happy coming to school? And they're like, yes. And I feel like that's a big part of the game. And I feel like that this makes that happen. It's not the only part, but people, it's not just students. People like to learn. School will be no fun if you're not learning, okay? But you gotta have fun too. They have to go together, and you have to want to be in the place that you're at, and it has to be enjoyable. And I feel like this kind of learning helps make that happen. And I think it's a lot more work for teachers, and I feel like teachers can't be satisfied with only doing this. They have to make sure that the kids have the skills that are necessary in 7th and 8th grade to succeed in high school, but also in life. So I feel like it's this combination of learning and happiness that it brings.
Yeah. To add on to that, I think I'd say we've already talked about how great it prepares you for the workforce. We've already talked about that kind of self-motivation that students have. But what I love seeing is students working really hard in a project without worrying about the grade at all. It was amazing to see kids coming after school because they just wanted the project to be good. Most of the time, kids are saying, what do I need to do to get an A on this? Is this an A paper? Am I done? And with the projects, there was never a done.
Right.
There's always more experiments you could run or tweaks you could make. And students didn't ask me about their grades.
Yeah.
We had a rubric. We looked at the rubric, but they forgot about it. And they were just interested in solving the problem or answering the question, which is really nice to see.
Well, believe it or not, we're out of time. So it goes so quickly. But for the audience, stop by at the Healy and check out the project-based learning that's going on, because I can attest full that it is amazing to see it, amazing to see the ownership of our young people and all that they learn from it, and the dedication of the teachers for putting the time into it. So,
And I think Andrew really hit the nail on the head when he said, students are excited to get up in the morning and go to school, and they'll stay after school.
that's right. So I don't know if you have announcements, but while you're thinking of that, I'm just going to say huge thank you. It's good to see everybody now that I'm back. But thank you to Steve, to Joe, to Linda, to George, and to Bruna for, again, helping us bring the show every single month to you.
And just a very quick reminder to please stay connected, follow us on social media, and visit our website to learn what's happening in our schools and in the city.
That's right. And register pre-K and kindergarten.
That's right.
It's active. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next month.
Edwin looking to create. Nice move. He will shoot, and he will score!